I want you to imagine a scene, and I mean, I really want you to visualize the details here. So picture a massive, highly funded, multi-day scientific symposium.
Okay, I'm picturing it like a huge academic conference.
Right. But it is taking place inside a gallery that is entirely filled with the works of Michelangelo.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so you've got, the Sistine Chapel ceiling towering overhead, the statue of David right there in the center of the room.
And maybe the Pietà illuminated in the corner or something.
Exactly. And for days on end, you have dozens of the world's most elite scientists, physicists, and art historians there, and they are just analyzing everything.
Oh, I see where this is going. They're like running X-ray crystallography on the Carrara marble to test its tensile strength, right?
Exactly. And they're using electron microscopes to study the curvature and the thickness of the brushstrokes.
Breaking down the exact chemical composition of the lapis lazuli paint to figure out its longevity.
Right. Delivering these incredibly elaborate, hours-long lectures on the precise mathematical proportions of the statues. But, and here is the catch, over the course of this entire days-long symposium, not once, I mean never, not a single time do they mention the name Michelangelo.
Wow. Yeah, that omission would be absolutely definite.
It would be completely absurd. Like, if you or I were standing there watching this happen, we would instantly question their competence.
Oh, for sure. We would think they were committing some kind of, I don't know, massive intellectual copyright infringement by intentionally ignoring the creator.
Right. Or at the very least, we would write them off as a bunch of ignorant showmen. Because you cannot separate the genius of the work from the genius of the artist and still claim to understand the art.
You really can't.
Yeah.
And that provocative analogy is the entry point for our deep dives today.
It's such a great hook.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because that exact scenario, the elite scientists ignoring Michelangelo, is the metaphor our source uses to launch this massive overarching critique of modern science, modern education, and specifically the physical environments we build.
Yeah, today we are looking at a highly impressive intellectual synthesis known as the Zulsenhain perspective, which translates to being two-winged.
Right. And to explore this, we are pulling from a very specific stack of sources today. We have a comprehensive biography and selected excerpts from a digitally published book titled Izelibed Zavasenden Memory.
Which translates roughly to architecture from the perspective of eternity to eternity, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the author is a Turkish master architect and restoration expert named Hayati Binler.
Okay, but before we jump fully in, we do need to give a quick disclaimer to you listening. Our sources today contain very strong religious and philosophical perspectives, specifically regarding Islamic architecture, science, and theology.
Right. And our goal today is not to take a side or endorse or debate these specific religious views.
Right. Our mission is just to impartially explore this fascinating intellectual framework. We want to synthesize what the author is arguing, understand the mechanisms of his theory, and really look at what this perspective asks you to reconsider about the literal buildings you live and work in.
So getting back to that Michelangelo analogy, the author takes that exact concept and aims it directly at how modern, secular society conducts its scientific observation of the universe.
Okay, let's unpack this. How does he make that leap?
Well, the central argument is that the universe is a flawless, incredibly complex piece of architecture.
Okay.
So studying the physical laws of this universe without acknowledging its creator is the functional equivalent of analyzing the Sistine Chapel without acknowledging Michelangelo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If dozens of scientists spend their entire lives detailing the physical mechanics of the cosmos, but refuse to mention the designer, the author views them as those exact ignorant showmen we talked about.
I was thinking about this, like analyzing the code of a massive, impossibly complex multiplayer video game.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. Like, imagine a group of people studying the physics engine of the game, just marveling at the rendering software, testing how the lighting perfectly reflects off digital surfaces, tracking how millions of players interact without the servers crashing.
But they stubbornly pretend that no developers ever wrote the code.
Exactly. They just look at the collision detection and say, well, the code just is. It organized itself.
Yeah, that's exactly the author's point. And the source takes that concept even further by pointing out that this code, the universe's architecture, isn't just a static thing that was built once and abandoned.
Right, it's not just left on a server somewhere.
Exactly. It is actively, constantly maintained. The author points out this simple but really profound observation. For billions of years, the sun hasn't gone on strike.
Yeah.
It hasn't taken a month off. It hasn't missed a single millisecond of its duty to provide heat and gravity to our solar system.
So no out-of-office auto-replies from the sun.
None. And because this system is actively maintained, science is essentially the study of an ongoing act of design.
Which is a huge shift in perspective.
It is. And what is vital to understand here is how the source uses this concept to actually elevate science. Acknowledging the architect of the universe does not diminish the scientific method.
It gives it a completely different weight, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. It gives science a profound, solid foundation of respect and value. Under this Zulsanaghan synthesis, science transitions from being this cold mechanical observation of random facts into an active act of discovering purposeful design.
So the scientist basically becomes an explorer of divine genius.
Exactly. It gives the study of physics and biology and chemistry a real sense of sacred importance.
Okay. So if looking at the universe without its creator makes us ignorant showmen, the alternative is this central methodology we mentioned earlier, the Zulsanaghan perspective.
Right, the two-winged approach.
Because a bird cannot fly with only one wing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
In this framework, one wing represents the physical, exact, and technical sciences. The math, the physics, the load-bearing calculations, the
Nuts and bolts.
Right. And the other wing represents metaphysical, spiritual, and moral education.
Mm.
The author argues that modern society is trying to fly with only the technical wing, and as a result, we are crashing.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
The author makes a very sharp, almost brutal critique of purely secular, one-winged education here. The source explicitly claims that teaching only technical skills without moral and spiritual grounding leads to, and I think I have the quote here, educated robbers and apron-wearing terrorists.
Yes, that is a very intense phrase.
It really is. And he takes this directly into his own field of architecture. He points out that the buildings that have tragically collapsed during earthquakes, literally becoming tombs for the people inside, were designed and built by university-educated architects and engineers.
People who possess the technical wing.
Right. So is the author really drawing a direct causal line from a lack of metaphysics to a collapsed building? Like, I'm struggling to see the mechanical connection there. Physics doesn't care about the builder's religion. Concrete doesn't ask if you have spiritual grounding before it decides to cure properly.
No, of course not. And the author's not arguing that praying over a blueprint replaces structural math.
Okay, good.
He isn't saying metaphysics chemically alters the concrete. The connection here is entirely ethical.
How so?
Well, technical skill, the how of building, without a moral and spiritual compass, the why of building leads to a systemic loss of ethics. When builders, contractors, or engineers lack a profound sense of divine responsibility, which is a concept referred to as eminent or trust, they become very susceptible to greed.
Oh, I see. It's the difference between how a neighborhood teenager babysits a child versus how a parent cares for that same child.
That's a great way to put it.
Like, the babysitter has the technical knowledge to keep the kid alive, sure, but they're ultimately doing it for a paycheck. If the shift is almost over and they notice a wobbly railing on the stairs, they might just ignore it because, it's not their problem.
Right.
But a parent has a profound inherent trust, an eminent. They fix the railing immediately because their fundamental motivation is totally different.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. The contractor with only the technical wing knows the math required to survive an earthquake.
Yeah.
But to save money, they use cheaper, substandard iron.
Oh, wow.
They use sea sand in the concrete without washing out the corrosive salt.
Mm-hmm.
They bypass safety regulations just to shave a few days off the schedule.
Because they can get away with it.
Exactly. They have the knowledge, but without that second wing, the moral terror of being held divinely accountable for human lives, their technical knowledge is essentially weaponized for profit.
Which perfectly explains the apron-wearing terrorist quote. Think about the last time you read a news story about a local bridge collapsing, or a new apartment complex being condemned for safety violations. You usually just assume it was a math error or a structural oversight.
But this perspective asks you to view it as a moral failure.
Right. It's not that the math failed, it's that the ethics failed, and that ethical failure is what corrupted the math.
Exactly. The highly educated professional who uses their advanced technical knowledge to exploit or harm others does so because they lack the moral wing to govern their expertise. The Zulsanaghan perspective demands that the architect sees human life as a sacred trust, not just a line item on an expense spreadsheet.
Which makes total sense. But, it's really easy to talk about spiritual wings and ethical foundations when you're just writing a philosophy book. I kept picturing an armchair philosopher sitting in a cozy library, detached from the dirt and noise of an actual construction site, dictating how things ought to be.
I could totally see why you'd think that.
Right. Does the author actually know how modern construction works?
His resume answers that question pretty definitively. Hayati Bindler is not just an academic theorist. He was born in 1960 in Isparta, Turkey, holds a master's degree in architecture, and is a highly specialized restoration expert.
So he's been out in the field.
Oh, heavily. The sheer scale of his practical field experience grounds his philosophy in reality. He spent decades at the Vakıflar General Directorate, which is the Directorate of Foundations in Turkey.
And during his time there, he managed the surveys, the restitution, and the restoration of around 300 cultural assets.
300. It's massive.
We are talking about historical mosques, ancient inns, traditional public baths, and massive caravanserais.
And he also worked internationally. He oversaw the restoration of the Hoca Ahmet Yesevi tomb in Kazakhstan, which is this incredible, massive Timurid-era structure. He served as a regional director, managed real estate branches, and sat on multiple cultural heritage preservation boards.
Okay, so the man has been in the trenches of architecture, bureaucracy, and construction his entire life.
Which really forces us to take his critique of the technical wing much more seriously. Bindler has literally deconstructed and rebuilt history.
Yeah, you can't really fake that.
No, you can't. When you restore a 500-year-old stone dome, you cannot fake the math. He fully understands the cold, unforgiving physics of load-bearing walls, of static calculations, and of material shear strength. He has mastered the technical wing.
So when a master architect with 300 major restorations under his belt, a man who knows exactly how concrete and stone behave under extreme stress, turns around and says, hey, we desperately need the spiritual wing, it really commands attention.
It absolutely does. It is not a rejection of science from someone who doesn't understand it. It is a critique of science from someone who has reached its absolute limits and realized it is just not enough to sustain human society.
So what's the solution then? Does he offer a practical alternative?
He does. The source offers his book as a direct alternative to modern architectural education, which he argues is obsessively focused on speed, performance, and commercial efficiency. His model is deeply inspired by something called the Medresetü Zera ideal.
Okay, break down how that ideal actually functions in practice for us.
Well, it is a concept developed by the influential Islamic scholar Bediüzzaman Said Nursi, to whom Bindler actually dedicates his book. The Medresetü Zera ideal is the ultimate manifestation of the two wings in an educational setting.
So bringing it into the classroom.
Right. It envisions a system where the exact physical sciences and the religious sciences are taught together, seamlessly balanced. The light of the mind comes from the exact sciences, and the light of the conscience comes from the religious sciences.
So imagine a university student learning static load calculations and thermodynamics in the morning, and then spending the afternoon studying the ethics of divine trust and the sanctity of human life.
Exactly. The curriculum is designed so the two inform each other. Under this view, architecture ceases to be just about providing shelter or, maximizing square footage for a developer. It becomes an act of ubudiyet, which means servitude or worship.
The architect views their work as a physical manifestation of divine principles.
Yes.
I understand how a student balances those subjects in a classroom, but how do you build a theological concept into a literal wall?
That's the real challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The source mentions 4 specific pillars: Tevhid, Risalet, Hashir, and Adalet. Let's actually walk through what these look like when you pour the foundation of a city.
We can start with Tevhid, which represents the absolute oneness and unity of God.
Okay.
In urban planning, a city designed with Tevhid in mind avoids extreme fractured segregation. You wouldn't have hyper-wealthy gated communities physically walled off from extreme poverty.
Because that breaks the unity.
Exactly. The roads and public spaces would emphasize a harmonious center, drawing people together into a place of communal unity rather than isolating them in endless, disconnected suburban sprawls. The architecture reflects the unity of creation.
That makes a lot of sense. The second concept is Risalet, which deals with prophethood and the guidance it brings. How does a building guide someone?
Well, prophethood is essentially about communication and purposeful direction. So a building informed by Risalet shouldn't be a mute, oppressive, concrete block. It should communicate its purpose beautifully and guide human behavior toward virtue.
Do you have an example?
Think of how a beautifully designed public library naturally encourages quiet reflection, respect, and learning just by the way the light filters in and how the spaces are organized. The architecture itself serves as a subtle guide.
Oh, I love that. Then there is Husher, the concept of resurrection and the afterlife. In architecture, this seems to speak directly to legacy and permanence, right?
That is the exact translation to the physical world. If your worldview includes Hasher, you do not build a disposable, poorly constructed strip mall that is designed to fall apart in 20 years just to minimize upfront costs.
Because you're thinking long term.
Very long term. You build with an awareness of permanence. You use sustainable, enduring materials. The architecture ages gracefully because it was built with a mindset that looks beyond immediate temporary utility.
Okay, and the final concept is Adelaide divine justice. A building designed with justice inherently respects human dignity and its surrounding environment, I assume.
Exactly. A just building does not block the sunlight of its neighbors.
Oh, that's a very practical application.
Right. It isn't built using exploited labor or toxic materials that poison the local watershed. It doesn't dominate the landscape oppressively. It is accessible, balanced, and fair to its environment.
So when you combine Tefid, Risalee, Hashir, and Adelaide, the aesthetic beauty of the building becomes a literal reflection of divine beauty. There is a quote from the source that absolutely floored me. He writes, "We think we create spaces, but over time, spaces create us."
That is the crux of the entire argument right there. That is the ultimate intellectual synthesis of his work.
It really makes you stop and look around the room you are sitting in right now.
It forces you to evaluate your environment, because if we build our cities and homes using only the single wing of technical efficiency, cost-cutting, and speed, with zero regard for spiritual beauty, harmony, or human dignity.
We don't just end up with ugly buildings.
No, we create environments that slowly, methodically erode our psychological and moral health.
We become the environments we build. If we build cold mechanical boxes, we become cold mechanical people.
A space designed purely for commercial turnover treats humans like cattle passing through a chute. A space designed with a two-winged perspective treats humans as beings with a soul, worthy of dignity, beauty, and peace.
Bindler is arguing that you cannot separate the physical health of a society from the metaphysical health of its architecture. So we started this deep dive with that vivid image of elite scientists standing in the middle of a gallery, running chemical tests on lapis lazuli and X-rays on marble, completely ignoring the existence of Michelangelo.
Right, and the author uses that absurdity to demand the Zulsanahane, the two-winged perspective, insisting that studying the universe without its architect is intellectual copyright infringement. We need both the technical how and the moral why to give science its true foundation of respect and value.
And we saw how that philosophy is really grounded in the reality of Hayati Bindler's life, a master architect who spent decades restoring 300 cultural assets, realizing that knowing the math of a load-bearing wall isn't enough to stop a contractor from cutting corners if they lack a moral compass.
His argument is that buildings must protect our bodies from earthquakes, yes, but they must also protect our souls from degradation.
Such a powerful thought.
It is. And whether you listening agree with the author's specific religious framework or not, his core warning is just impossible to ignore. A society that values only the speed and efficiency of technology without ever stopping to ask why it matters or what moral foundation it rests on is building its future on a very dangerous fault line.
It profoundly changes how you view the skyline. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over today, building on what the author said about spaces eventually creating us. If a carefully designed historical building, like the centuries-old inns and mosques Bindler restores, was constructed with the specific intent to teach us about unity, justice, and human dignity.
What exactly are the buildings of today teaching us?
Exactly. Think about the purely utilitarian concrete and glass boxes of our modern corporate cities. If you look at a windowless, million-square-foot e-commerce fulfillment warehouse or a towering, hyper-exclusive luxury skyscraper standing right next to a tent city, what are those structures secretly teaching us about our own society's true values? And when we walk the halls of our modern masterpieces, are we acting like those ignorant showmen marveling at the paint but entirely forgetting the soul?